In this video, we're going to look at three distinctions that are going to be important for the course. The first one is between syntax and semantics. So syntax um, is the set of rules for constructing proper sentences in a language. In natural language, this is what we refer to as grammar. And then in artificial languages like symbolic logic, it's generally just called syntax. Um, then you have semantics, and semantics are the rules for interpreting sentences in a language or giving meanings to those sentences. One illustration of the difference is due to Noam Chomsky. Um, this was his example was the sentence "colorless green ideas sleep furiously." So this is a grammatical English sentence, right? It obeys all the rules of English syntax. So it's a well-formed English sentence, but it doesn't have any meaning, right? Like you can't, the rules for interpreting English sentences don't allow you to assign a meaning to this, right? I mean, colorless and green contradict each other. Ideas don't sleep. Furious sleeping doesn't make any sense, right? So it has no meaning, but it is a grammatical sentence. The second distinction is between use and mention. So these are actually often confused in ordinary language because they both involve people speaking or writing down words. But there's a key difference in whether when people are speaking or writing down a word, whether they're using the word or the phrase or they're mentioning the word or the phrase. So an expression is used if the intention behind it is to communicate some sort of information or to bring about some state of affairs in the real world, which is called a speech act. These are the two main uses of language, right? You can use language to communicate information. You can use language to do things, right? I mean, like, so for an example, right, as a teacher, right, in a in an in-person class, right, if I'm teaching the class, I can get up and I can say the class is now over. Um, that doesn't just communicate the information that the class is now over, right? Because of the fact that I'm the teacher, it actually ends the class, right? It's by making that utterance as a teacher who's teaching the class, I can bring something about, perform an action in the real world, which is to end the class, right? This is a speech act. So when you're performing speech acts, you're using an expression. You're also using an expression if you're communicating information. So if I just kind of mumble, the class is now over, and then somebody in the back of the room turns to, another student and says, what did the professor just say? And the other one says, um, the class is now over, right? Now, in that case, right, what that student is doing is communicating information, right? That student is communicating the information that the class is over, right? That student can't end the class, right? Student doesn't have the power to do that. And then an expression is mentioned if what you're doing is you're talking about that expression. So like for example, this entire time when I've been talking about the class is now over, I mean, there's no class, right? That like there's nothing going on. There's nothing to be over, right? So there's nothing for me to use in this case. What I've been doing the whole time is mentioning it. I'm talking about that expression. So all of my uses there have been these have been cases of mention, right? I haven't actually been using that phrase. I mean, it wouldn't be possible for me to do that because there's no class. Okay, here are a couple other examples, right? So here's some examples of use, right? Smoked salmon is on sale. Salmon here is being used to refer to a food source. Give me some cheese. Give me some cheese is a speech act. It's making a request or a demand, maybe in this case. Here's some cases of mention. Salmon used to be spelled Sammon, but then they put an L in the word to make it look more like Latin. That's pretty ridiculous if you ask me. This is mentioned because it's talking about the word salmon. It's not talking about this stuff, right? Or the fish. It's talking about the word itself. Yelling, give me some cheese is not polite. This is also mentioned because it's talking about the expression itself. It's not actually, demanding cheese or making a request for cheese. Okay. The third distinction is a little bit more complicated. Um, And we'll get into that we'll actually start by talking about some paradoxes. So the Barber paradox, this is a famous old paradox, originally due to Bertrand Russell. So John is a barber. He lives in a small town and he grows facial hair. And he shaves all the people with facial hair in his town who do not shave themselves, and only those people with facial hair in town who do not shave themselves. So, does John shave himself? Um, try to answer that question, you run into a problem because suppose he does. Well, I mean, if he does shave himself, according to this, he only shaves people who do not shave themselves. So if he shaves himself, he can't shave himself. If he does not shave himself, though, then according to this, this says he shaves all the people who do not shave themselves. So if he doesn't shave himself, he has to shave himself. Either way, you get a contradiction, right? This is the barber paradox. Does John shave himself? Either a yes or no answer gives you a contradiction. Um, okay, what's the resolution to this paradox? Because I mean, this setup, right? It leads to a contradiction, right? You end up right this hypothesis that we or this scenario that we've laid out, right? It leads to this contradiction where you get this barber who apparently both shaves himself and does not shave himself. Um, how do you resolve this paradox? Um, it's actually fairly simple, and like it's not that difficult. The solution is just this: there's no such barber, right? Like you actually just can't have a barber of this sort, right? It's not possible. This condition that we've laid out for what the barber does is not possible, right? You can't have a barber who fits this description. That's what the paradox proves. Um, now, here's something that's a little bit more complicated. This sentence is false. Um, this this is known as the liar paradox. It's originally due to Epimenides. The original version of it that Epimenides presented was all Cretans are liars. Um, Epimenides was from Crete, so the idea was that you have somebody who's from Crete saying that all Cretans are liars. But to simplify everything, the modern version of it is just this sentence is false. Okay, the question is this: is the sentence true or false? I mean, if it's true, then it has to be false because it says that, I mean, what the sentence says is that it's false. So if it's true, then it has to be false. You can conclude from that it's not true. If it's false, though, then it's true because what it says is that it's false. So if the sentence is false, then what the sentence says is true, which means that the sentence would be true. So it can't be false. So apparently the sentence can't be true or false. Um, this is a lot trickier to solve than the barber paradox because well, see, the problem is this, right? The barber paradox, all you could do was you could just look at that and say, well, right, there are no such barbers. And that is not problematic. You can't make that move here because you can't just say, well, there's no such sentence. Or it's at least very, very difficult to just go and say there's no such sentence because look, it's right there, right? Like, I mean, you can't just deny the existence of the sentence. Here it is. I wrote it on a slide. So actually solving the problem is going to be trickier than it looks. The way that we're going to solve it is by making this distinction between object language and meta language. So the distinction here is it's between the language that's being discussed, which is the object language, and the language in which we are discussing it, which is the meta language, right? So you have the language that we're talking about, and then you have the language that we're using to talk about that thing. Um, so, for example, take this sentence: Schnee ist weiß is German for snow is white. And let it go. Here we go. Now it came back. Here, Schnee ist weiß is the object language, right? So the object language here is German, right? Because Schnee ist weiß is German. This here in blue is German for snow is white, is the meta language. The meta language here is English. right? Because that's the language that we're using to talk about this German sentence. Now, in informal contexts, you can use one language to talk about itself, right? So the object language and the meta language are the same thing. So you take like raft is a four-letter word. Object language and meta language are both English, right? So we're using English to talk about itself. But and this is the standard resolution of the liar paradox is or the standard diagnosis of the liar paradox is to say that the problem that you have in the liar paradox is the fact that the sentence is talking about itself, and so the sentence there is also in both the object language and the meta language. um, right, this sentence is false is referring to this sentence right here, and so it is both in the object language and the meta language. That gives an idea though for how to resolve it. The way that you can resolve it is you make sure that the object language and the meta language are distinct, at least in logic. I mean, in informal contexts, we can still use, right? We can still use, English to talk about other English sentences, right? But in logic, we will make sure that the object language and the meta language are going to be distinct, because that means that you can't formulate sentences like the liar paradox, right? You can't formulate them because they're in both the object language and the meta language. By keeping those things distinct, we prevent that contradiction or that paradox from arising. Um, so, yeah, that's the end of that. So that's the reason for keeping object language and meta language distinct, which is something that the textbook, of course, is like very, very careful about doing.